Tuesday, May 2nd. Today is the 26th day of Sfiras Omer. It is the 11th day of Iyar. That's the lunar month. That means we're 4 days away from the full moon. You are listening to Weather with Enthusiasm.
Meteorologist Simcha Lefton. Weather with Enthusiasm is his podcast.
The music on this podcast is background music and therefore should be permissible to listen to during Sfira. This podcast will likely be added on to yesterday's podcast. The main podcast this week was made yesterday, Monday, May 1st. We have a very exciting situation that's headed for the Midwest for next week. This is the first time that I've noticed it for this year. High humidity with dew points approaching 70 degrees in southern Illinois, along with temperatures going up into the mid-80s is forecasted to happen according to the European computer model. Chicago area has a very interesting situation going on for next Tuesday. In fact, these 80s is taking place for sure on Tuesday. For sure means nothing's ever for sure in weather, but the European computer model for sure said this. Temperatures going into the mid-80s for southern Illinois on Tuesday, and temperatures going into the mid or upper 70s for the Chicago area. That's according to the European computer model. But here is the interesting part. So you would think that if it's in the mid-80s in southern Illinois, and let's say mid-70s all the way up to the coast, upper 70s, a little bit further inland, mid-70s right along the beach. So you would think the temperatures gradually decline as you approach Chicago, but it doesn't. The temperatures actually go way down, with highs only in the lower 70s in the central part of the state. This is according to the European computer model. And then the temperatures start to warm again as you approach the Chicago area. And the question is why? Why does the European computer model say this? So that's something that needs to be looked into. Because one would think, at first glance, there's a very simple answer. The dew points are probably much higher in the central part of the state. That's where the cornfields are. Person drives from Chicago to St. Louis, they will see a lot of cornfields. So we have tons of cornfields, and cornfields increase humidity. The question is the corn crop out yet? Probably. There's probably the beginning stages of the corn crop. We're already holding in May. But if you look at the dew point forecast, you don't find such a thing. You find that the dew points are highest in southern Illinois, and dew points gradually go down as you approach the Chicago area. Dew points headed into the low 60s for the Chicago area, upper 50s to low 60s. So there will be a humid feel to the air by Tuesday afternoon. And then southern Illinois will have more than just a humid feel. St. Louis, Missouri, dew points going well into the 60s, upper 60s, possibly even 70 degrees. The European computer model shows dew points hitting 69 degrees in St. Louis with temperatures in the mid-80s. This is a summer air mass in the south central states into the southern Midwest. In fact, the peak heating this time around in regards to the extended spell of warmth could very well be in Missouri eastward. The plains might get their warmth cut short by probably an additional day than what you would find for areas further east. We have an omega block weather pattern that gets set up over the area today, with temperatures going into the 70s and 80s over in the Colorado, Montana, and even with the Wyoming area for this afternoon. An omega block means the weather pattern is going to look like the Greek letter omega. And what that means is that we're going to have cold air, a trough of low pressure on the west coast, low pressure on the east coast, with an omega, the warmth, the ridge, which is where all the warmth is going to be, that's going to be taking place right in between. So we have all this cold air, which we spoke about yesterday. In fact, it's unusual unusually cold, much colder than usual in the upper atmosphere, going all the way down, pretty far down into the southeastern parts of the United States. Yesterday, we were pointing out that there are strong indications that this is in Florida. It is. It certainly was. And we have, in that area, is really on the East Coast, the air is just cold in the upper atmosphere. The West Coast also, that heat that was on the West Coast has moved eastward, and we're dealing with cold conditions in the upper atmosphere on the East Coast as well. A cooling trend for Phoenix, Arizona. Yesterday forecasted highs well into the 90s for Phoenix. We pointed out Sunday hit 100 degrees, and as you go further into the week, temperatures gradually get cooler for the Phoenix area, with highs gradually dropping through the 80s. So you have the heat, however, takes place right in between these two cold areas, very similar to what we had a year ago. But a year ago, probably May 8th or so, we had those temperatures soaring into the 90s over a large part of the Midwest. So a year ago, it was taking place a little bit further east than what's happening this year, and it was significantly stronger. In fact, it was unseasonably strong. That we don't have this year. But eventually, this ridge does make it further east, and by Friday, as we pointed out yesterday, we have temperatures going into the 80s and even the 90s. By that time, you have Oklahoma. Oklahoma's well into it by Friday and even Thursday, but Friday they're well into it. And the 90s, something which pops up on Friday. But this is the part that we have not dealt with, and that's the Chicago area, the local Chicago area, according to the European computer model. We have, as we mentioned yesterday, a continuous lake component to the wind for the rest of this week. And in fact, that even includes Friday. That includes Shabbos. Temperatures might get slightly cooler on Shabbos as winds become northeast instead of southeast. And Sunday might become a little bit warmer. The real warmth comes in Tuesday, especially for areas near the lake. That's finally when the southwest winds get going. Wednesday, we have the situation becoming a little bit cooler as winds once again become southeast, which is a strange thing because we're going to have to wait a day before the real cool air comes in, and that's going to come in on Thursday. So usually we go from southwest winds to northwest winds. Southwest winds ahead of the front. Winds become northwest. So the day right after becomes real warm. That's when the conditions become real cold. But next week, the forecast is for there to be a day in between where winds are from the southeast. So for the lakeside areas, temperatures are going to be cooler on Wednesday than the rest of the area. But Tuesday, it's really warm everywhere right now. That's right before a storm system moves in, and that's even for West Rogers Park. We're dealing with serious warmth on Tuesday. Last year, this time of the year, the European computer model was so accurate for St. Louis, Missouri, for areas like that, away from Lake Michigan, where there's no lake affecting that area. It was almost like a prophecy. So the weather pattern is the same, very similar this year to last year. One would think that the European computer model should be very accurate this year as well for areas which are not influenced by the complexities of a lake, and also for areas which are well entrenched in the warm air. So just to clarify once again, we're under cold airflow for today and tomorrow here in West Rogers Park. Winds will come out of the south on Thursday, but southeast. There's a lake component to the wind. Friday, there's less of a lake component to the wind. Shabbos, there's a much more of a lake component to the wind. In fact, on Shabbos, the cooler air might even move all the way inland. Sunday, there's less of a component to the lake wind. Monday, there's less of a component to the lake wind. Tuesday, there's no lake wind whatsoever. Conditions will be cooler on the water right at the beach, but only slightly cooler. Wednesday, there is a lake component to the wind, and then Thursday, the cold air. You've been listening to the podcast, Weather with Enthusiasm. This trailer was updated at the very end of January 2023. We have two things going on. We have evaporative cooling and we also have dynamic cooling, and the two are coming together to produce a major snowstorm in the deep south. The only time you could blame cold air on climate change is when it's a result of the stratosphere warming, which is what causes all the Arctic air to come down south. The way to get a 6-inch snowstorm here in the Midwest and in the Southern Plains has always been you need 3 ingredients. It's hard to believe the numbers that are being forecasted.
Several additional feet of snow is expected by Monday morning.
Yes! Hey, we have a special guest on our show. What is your name?
Kitabis.
27.1 barometric pressure. Feet of snow are falling in Japan.
Oh my gosh.
That's a time of celebration. Just Google weather with enthusiasm and they're all going to come up.